You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday, the 8th of October. God-hating killer murders vicar and leaves widow a note. HIV fear policewoman stabbed by needle. Assange backers pay nearly £100,000. The French want new anti-terrorist laws whilst building more mosques. Where is foreign aid going to in South Africa? Try a helipad. I need the ladies. No, I need the gents, or is it the ladies? It could only happen in Turkey, or could it? Thought for the day, a question of taste or morals. And finally, Zombie Nation, you don't have to tell me. UK news. The God-hating killer, a drifter accused of murdering vicar and widow, had note left threatening Christian scum. A killer scattered gay DVDs, a Bible and party popper streamers over the body of a murdered vicar, a court heard yesterday. Stephen Farrow, 48, then stayed at the vicarage for several hours watching an Indiana Jones DVD and drinking beer. The stabbed body of Reverend John Suddards, 59, was later discovered by workmen next to a carefully propped up painting of Jesus. A Bible was left on the dead man's chest, opened at the letter of Jude. It reminds the reader to live a virtuous and faithful life and warns against denying God and succumbing to the pleasures of the flesh. It is one of the shortest books in the Bible, being only 25 verses long. Farrow denies murdering Betty Yates in Bewdley, Worcestershire, in January and the Reverend John Suddards in February this year. HIV fear policewoman stabbed by shoplifter with needle. PC Gemma Newman is now living with the fear she may have been infected with the virus after shoplifter Grzegorz Pajal, who claims he is HIV positive, stabbed her with a hypodermic needle. Gloucester Crown Court heard that it was the third time Polish national Pajal had brandished a syringe when caught shoplifting. Pajal, 28, is scheduled to be deported when he has served his 32-month sentence. A World Date writer comments, "Before would be better for all concerned." Assange backers have been told to pay £93,500. Backers who stood as sureties for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange had been ordered to pay £93,500 by November the 6th. He said all those who offered sureties of varying amounts are convinced that they have done and are doing the right thing. In his ruling, the Chief Magistrate Howard Riddle said he accepted that the 9 had all acted in good faith, saying, "I accept that they trusted Mr Assange to surrender himself as required. I accept that they followed the proceedings and made necessary arrangements to remain in contact with him. However, they failed in their basic duty to ensure his surrender." European news. Paris. A new anti-terrorism bill unveiled by France's government on Wednesday would expand already tough laws and seek to deter people from travelling abroad to train at terror camps. In March, a young French radical, Mohamed Merah, killed 3 Jewish children, a rabbi and 3 paratroopers over 8 days before he died in a standoff with the police. This measure, and I quote, "will let us pursue people who are going to terrorism training camps abroad even if they haven't committed any crimes on French soil," government spokeswoman Najat Vallaud-Belkacem said. Current laws only allow prosecution of French nationals if crimes that they commit abroad are penalised in the same way as in France, and if foreign authorities point out the crimes by French people. A World Date spokesman commented, "And all this hubris when the French government had just opened a new mega-terrorist training camp, Mosques, in Paris." World news. From Johannesburg, South Africa. The extensive and very hush-hush revamp of President Jacob Zuma's Nkandla homestead is set to cost taxpayers a whopping R203 million. The Public Works Department approved the budget in March last year, despite earlier claims by the department that Zuma, 70, was funding the project from his own pocket. According to official departmental documentation, the President will only pay R10.6 million himself. This is less than 5% of the total cost to revamp his family compound in KwaZulu-Natal, where his 4 current wives and their children live. The work includes the building of a helipad, underground bunkers and fencing around the entire complex. The taxpayer already maintains the state residences used by the President in the capital Pretoria and Cape Town, where Parliament sits. A World Day spokesperson said, "The government have announced that £1 billion will be paid by the British taxpayer to combat climate change in Africa. Some of this money will go to South Africa, a country that has a healthy, growing economy. This money is in addition to the £282.5 million in 2011 for climate change, £41 million for climate change in Ethiopia and £13.2 million to South Africa. In short, a total of £2.9 billion will be paid in international aid during this sitting Parliament. What a complete farce." From Canada, Rob Anders of Calgary West, a Tory MP, is upset because a new bill, C-279, sponsored by British Columbia NDP MP Randall Garrison, would expand the Human Rights Act and Criminal Code to include gender identity and gender expression as grounds for discrimination. The bill's goal is to give transgendered men access to women's washrooms. He says it's the duty of the House of Commons to protect children from any exposure or harm that will come from giving men this kind of access. Needless to say, the transgender community in Calgary and beyond is somewhat peeved off over this affair and terribly inaccurate stereotype. A transgender spokesperson said, "The suggestion that this is somehow some conspiracy of trans people to sneak into bathrooms deliberately to harm people is ludicrous. Trans people have been sneaking into bathrooms all over Canada for decades with, as far as I know, zero evidence of any instance whatsoever." A World Day spokesperson said, "I feel like Victor Meldrew again. I simply do not believe this." A man was detained in Bursa province in Turkey's Marmara region for allegedly raping a duck. Daily Haberturk reported. Police forces detained the man following complaints from his in-laws, who claimed he had raped one of their ducks during an overnight stay in their house. The man's father-in-law said he found feathers and blood in a bed with the duck. The duck was unable to walk, according to the father-in-law. The man's mother-in-law told Daily Haberturk that she later discovered the man's bloody shirt by a tree the next morning. The 50-year-old suspect denied all accusations, calling them slander. The duck was found to have suffered deformation and damage to its intestines and underwent several operations. It is now reportedly in good condition and remains in the veterinarian's care. A World Day spokesperson said something that cannot be repeated here, but centres on the man involved having his privates cut off and fed to pigs in front of him, and also the information that on Google's for bird sex it is on record that the Islamic country of Egypt rates the highest hits. That says a lot for the people of mainly Islamic Turkey, the country that the EU want included in their numbers. Or is it just a load of quackers? My sympathy is with the poor duck, bless him. Not a pleasant experience for him. Thought for the day. Good or bad taste or just bad morals? Now this is the question, isn't it? You must have noticed that the main object of the news is poor little April and Jimmy Savile and his alleged vile goings-on at the BBC. Now Savile I'm not surprised at, he always struck me as a bit odd, but I do not want to speak ill of the dead. Now the tragic case of April Jones, 5, is another matter. Apparently there's been a huge input on every level from the public on this alleged rape and murder, although to be fair, no one, except maybe the local police, actually know anything about Mark Bridger, and that does not extend to the whereabouts of this poor mite's body. What is known are the facts that Bridger has been arrested on suspicion of April's murder and subsequently charged. That is all anyone knows for a fact. There's been the usual outpouring of grief and shredding of clothes and beating of breasts, understandably in this case, all of which have been ably assisted and promoted by the press and media. In fact, just what they needed. A little white girl abducted, raped and murdered ostensibly by a white middle-aged man and an ex-soldier at that. Feelings quite justifiably run high when a paedophile murder occurs in any country. It is a crime which is unjustified in itself, and no one can justify the murder of a 5-year-old child. There have been the usual ghastly postings and jokes and appallingly bad taste, but then without excusing them, and I'm not, there are always a plethora of terrible jokes at the expense of the dead, whatever their ages and wherever they occur. You must remember the tasteless jokes about Diana's death, floods in India and general disasters. In fact, anything that involves death and destruction brings out the worst in certain human beings. Whether it is a knee-jerk reaction to feelings, I do not know, but is it fair to prosecute some of the people who do it? Remember, if the Crown or State prosecutes certain people for offensive literature or postings, that could encompass anyone in the future who has an opinion. One man's joke may not appeal to another, but he can choose to delete it or ignore it, whilst an opinion could be classed in the same section, and this could encompass our freedom in this country to express political views as well as, or indeed as, religious views. Now I'm going to read an article from the web. Man charged over April Jones' Facebook comment. Matthew Wood, a 20-year-old from Chorley, has become the latest British person to be arrested and charged for making offensive comments on a social network. David Meyer of ZDNET, a website dedicated to technology news, writes, "The lack of free online speech in the UK is again in the spotlight after a man from Chorley was arrested and charged over comments posted on Facebook about the missing 5-year-old April Jones. Chorley resident Matthew Wood's charge under Section 127 of the Communications Act 2003 is the latest in a line of recent crackdowns on offensive comments made using social media in the UK. The same law which makes it a crime to send a menacing message by electronic means was used in the so-called Twitter joke trial, in which a man named Paul Chambers was successfully prosecuted for jokingly threatening to blow up an airport. Chambers subsequently won his appeal. Last month a Liverpool man was arrested under the same law for setting up a Facebook page that apparently praised the alleged killer of 2 police officers. It is not yet clear what Wood's alleged comments entailed, but the line between what is mildly offensive and grossly offensive appears to be up for debate. The UK Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer, recently refused to prosecute someone who had been arrested for a nasty tweet about Olympic swimmer Tom Daley. Some other countries also target people for what they say on Facebook. A man was recently arrested in Malaysia for making anti-Islamic comments on the website. End of statement. Now I know that the comments about April were unnecessary and gross and in the worst possible taste, also hurtful in the extreme to her parents and family. But I will leave that to my listeners to make up their own mind. My point is that whilst this case is ongoing and April's body has not yet been found, the jury is out until it is. Once her little body shows DNA and exactly what happened to her and by whom, then the web can let rip on the people who want to have Bridger in the basement and do God knows what, but I feel until then silence is golden. The really sad thing, apart from April's unnecessary death, is her age. 5 is so young to have met such a dreadful end. Try imagining putting yourself in her body during her last minutes and the picture is not a good one. They will put Bridger, if he is the killer, on the same sex offenders register as guys who look at disgusting and perverted child porn on their computers but who never commit other crimes. The same list as a guy who goes on a date and misreads a message and rapes his date of legal years, and whilst in the company of many men and women who deserve it, there are many who do not. And do not think for a minute I'm trivialising rape or anything to do with it. I'm not. I leave it to the courts to do that. But I do believe there should be 2 sections of ages for the official term, paedophilia. True paedophilia, in my opinion, is the rape of children from birth to 10 years. I say this because children of those ages do not know much about the sexual act, if at all, and cannot consent. Young girls of 10 up to 16 nowadays do know about sex and nearer the end of that bracket can, in some cases, instigate sex. It does not take away the crime of paedophilia per se, but it could give harsher sentences to the lower bracket, and by harsh I mean castration pure and simple. Baby rape, I'm led to believe, exists in the African communities in Africa and over here and is unreported. Child brides exist in the Muslim and Hindu world and are married at 9. For centuries, even in our culture in Europe, very young girls were married off to much older men who would probably qualify today as paedophiles. For centuries, the younger the girl, as soon as she started her periods, which in certain cultures can start as early as 9, she was married off, probably either for a dowry received or paid, or simply to stop her wandering off. Now do not think for a minute I'm excusing the older age group of girls, or indeed boys, as being the normal and accepted victims of paedophiles. I'm not, far from it. Thus we have the very unreported cases of Muslim underage sexual grooming and the very over-reported cases of Mrs Walker and her indefinite ASBO, which commented on those very crimes. Mrs Walker was punished for tasteless and vile literature, whilst the Muslims themselves were not only freed due to police stupidity, but paid for their depraved and vile behaviour in the murder of Charlene Downs. Now, you could not put the case of Charlene Downs in the same bracket as that of April Jones. April was an innocent who was abducted and killed. Her body, as yet, has not been found. Charlene was 14 years old, still a child, but grown up enough to know a group of young girls who allegedly gave sexual favours to these Muslim paedophiles for a bag of chips. Now, whether this is true or just a rumour is not known, but despite these goings on, Charlene was still underage and was raped and murdered, and her body has never been found. My personal view is that at 13 I was still at private school, but still went with a friend along the seafront at Brighton looking for teddy boys, or in fact anything young and male. We all did. 13 is the age when most girls have hormones, and a lot of them. Luckily for us, we found a couple of tame teddy boys who bought us ice cream and left us alone. That was in the late 1950s, and society was much safer then. I was not sexualised at all, and in fact remained remarkably ignorant of certain sexual matters until rather late in the day. I would not have known what a blowjob was at that age, whereas most youngsters now know it all. Society and the media must share in the results of early sexualisation of our youngsters and the death of decency in the UK today. It certainly does not excuse the awful crime of paedophilia, but the punishment should fit the crime. And under 16 rape and murder should be punishable by death. The Muslim paedophiles in the Charlene Downs case are murderers, but it is unproved under the laws of the land, so they should be castrated and sent home with their families. Other Muslim paedophiles should be castrated and deported. Paedophile murderers in both brackets, birth to 16, should be hung. There should be a zero tolerance on paedophiles who take young lives regardless of their ethnicity, religion or colour. My point is that the media rate these crimes for us. If you're white, you must not express your views on the web. If you're white, you will be arrested and charged, quite rightly. If you are white, you'll be imprisoned and the key thrown away, quite rightly. Now, if you are a Muslim or another religion or ethnicity, the police will be told to dumb down your case, not give your name or picture to the press. You'll probably go free because of the lack of evidence. You might even be paid for the privilege of being reported. And if anyone, and I mean anyone, says anything about you in a leaflet, the media or the web, they will be prosecuted, not the paedophile, because they are of the religious group that the government want on side to vote. So if white, it is open season. I do not mind laws, but they should protect everybody, not just the supposed few ethnic minorities. We allow African war criminals to stay, rapists, paedophiles and murderers in this country. What chance do decent ordinary people have if they cannot state their opinions, however gross or stupid they may seem? The basic trouble is that most people nowadays are not raised or educated with the ethics of manners. And even if they were, the web and the fact of virtual anonymity appeals to the darker side of man's and women's natures. And finally, Zombie Nation. More than 2,000 of Britain's groaning undead gather to set UK record. Over 2,000 of Britain's undead shuffled, staggered and crawled over a farm in Crawley, West Sussex to beat the world record of undead meetings. Shane Ritchie joined in the melee whilst leaving his costume at home. No doubt the EastEnders star didn't need it. Sadly, the UK zombies didn't break the US record of 4,000 in 2010, but they still broke the UK record. Funny that, I thought there were many more undead in the UK than 2,113, but I must have been misinformed. Ladies and gentlemen, we need local UK researchers to put input into the World at 8. We have a very good and productive people for the world and our continent, and our usual reporter is away who mainly does the UK news. As you will see, the entire printed UK news is comprised of Little April and Savile and the two main parties' conference. Alas, not a lot. We need local stories from local sources for additional interest, and the more the merrier. You have been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar, and I wish you all a very good night.